Hey guys, it's Aaron Respect, and today we're diving deep in one of the most ambitious yet overlooked attempts to revive a legendary genre, Quake Champions. This was supposed to be a game that brought back arena shooters in a big way, a modern revival of fast-paced, skill-based FPS gameplay that Quake practically invented. But instead, it stumbled hard. Now don't get me wrong, on paper Quake Champions had a lot going for it. It was developed by id Software, published by Bethesda. They were just coming off the huge success of Doom 2016. It combined the speed of classic Quake with the modern hero shooter elements, think Overwatch meets Quake 3 Arena. It had legacy, it had hype, it had talent, it had fans who wanted this game to succeed, but it just didn't. Today we're going to break down exactly why Quake Champions failed to bring back arena shooters. We'll go over gameplay decisions, timing, monetization, and a wider shooter landscape that it tried to break into. Because Quake Champions isn't just a failed revival, it's a lesson on how not to bring back a classic. From missed opportunities to community alienation, there's a lot to unpack. So buckle up, whether you're a diehard arena shooter fan, a former Quake god, or just curious on what went wrong, this video is going to break it all down. Let's start by rewinding the clock and setting the stage. What exactly was Quake Champions supposed to be? What were the goals? And why was the hype so real at launch? So before we dive into why Quake Champions fell short, we need to understand the weight it was carrying, because Quake isn't just another shooter series, it's the blueprint for the entire arena FPS genre. It's the reason half of the FPS mechanics we take for granted even exist. Let's go back to the 1990s. In 1996, id Software dropped Quake, a revolutionary first-person shooter that brought full 3D environments and real-time online multiplayer to the mainstream. With rocket jumps, strafing, and intense 1v1 duels, it wasn't just a step forward, it was a leap into a new era of FPS gaming. And then came the legends. Quake 2, 1997 introduced faster gameplay and mod support. While it's not as iconic in multiplayer, it still pushed technical boundaries. Quake 3 Arena 1999, this was the crown jewel. Pure multiplayer, no campaign, just fast-paced, skill-heavy combat. It was designed for competitive play and it showed. In an era of no perks, no classes, just your movement, your aim, and the map. And to jump forward, Quake Live 2010, a browser-based revival of Quake 3 designed to bring back arena FPS to the masses. It kept the dream alive for nearly a decade and helped shape modern esports. And this isn't just nostalgia talking. Quake's DNA is all over the genre. Games like Halo, Overwatch, Call of Duty, and Apex Legends owe their movement systems, map layouts, and core loop concepts to what Quake helped pioneer. So when Quake Champions was announced at E3 2016, fans were hyped. This was supposed to be the grand return, the reintroduction of pure, high-octane deathmatch chaos to a new generation. But it wasn't just the Quake fans who were excited, it was the entire arena shooter fanbase. People who had grown tired of kill streaks, regenerating health, and aim-down sights were starving for something faster, pure, and more skill-focused. Arena shooters were niche in the 2010s, but they had loyal communities. Even Unreal Tournament 4 was in the works before it was canned. It tried to recapture that magic. But none had the brand recognition or developer pedigree that Quake Champions did. This wasn't some indie attempt, this was id Software, the house that built FPS. Especially coming off the success of Doom 2016, backed by Bethesda, one of the biggest publishers in gaming. If anyone could revive arena shooters, it was them. The potential was massive, the return to competitive roots, bring back esports-worthy gameplay, introduce younger players to the joy of trick jumping, rail shots, and quad damage rampages, reignite the QuakeCon crowd with something truly fresh. And initially, things looked promising. The closed beta in 2017 had buzz, the game looked gorgeous in motion, the gunplay was tight, the speed was there, but so were the red flags. We'll be covering it in the next section. Quake Champions wasn't just trying to revive the arena shooter, it was also trying to modernize it. Add hero shooter elements, monetization systems, a free-to-play model, and that's where the problems started to creep in. Because when you mess with a formula that people considered sacred, you better nail it. If Quake Champions had one defining trait, the thing that separated it from the previous Quake game, it was this: Champions. In classic Quake, every player started the match equal, same health, same armor potential, same speed, and access to the same weapons via map control. Victory came down to raw skill, your ability to move, aim, and outthink your opponent in a game that was brutally fast and unforgiving. But with Quake Champions, id Software decided to shake up the formula. Each character called a champion had unique stats and abilities. Suddenly, we weren't just fragging with rockets and rails, we were doing it with cooldowns, health variations, and passive traits that changed how the game was played. At a glance, this move made sense. Hero shooters were hot at the time, Overwatch had just exploded, so why not modernize Quake to appeal to that audience? But here's the thing, Quake was never supposed to be a hero shooter. At the moment they introduced asymmetry into a game known for perfect symmetry, they divided the audience. Let's break down a few major gameplay decisions that raised eyebrows. Each champion had different health, armor, speed, and active abilities, like teleporting, invisibility, healing totems, etc. This meant from the very first second of the match, the playing field was no longer equal. Want to move faster than everybody else? Pick Anarchy. Want a tank that can heal himself mid-fight? Want teleportation to get out of trouble? While these abilities added a layer of depth and personality, they interfered with the purity of the duel. The fight wasn't always decided by who landed the better shot or timed the quad damage, it could be won by someone hitting their cooldown first. For longtime Quake players, this was heresy. The champion system created huge balancing problems, especially early on. Some players had small hitboxes and high mobility, making them annoying to hit, while others were tanky enough to survive rail shots that would have been lethal in older games. The variety of movement styles also made the map design inconsistent. Some champions could reach areas, others couldn't. Especially in a game where movement and control are everything, this was a serious issue. It broke the consistency that made Quake duels so skill-based, and it led to meta abuse. Now, introducing cooldowns into a Quake game was risky. Classic Quake is a test of endurance and map knowledge. Knowing where to get your armor, when power-ups spawn, and how to deny your opponent resources. That was the game. By comparison, active abilities often bypass the need for this strategy. Why worry about controlling the mega health when you can just heal yourself? Why worry about flanking when you can just teleport or go invisible? The result was a game that felt less strategic and more chaotic, and not the good kind of Quake chaos. Even worse, these abilities made the game less readable. In Classic Quake, you always knew what your opponent could do because you could do the same. In Champions, you constantly had to guess what power your opponent might pop next. That unpredictability added frustration rather than excitement. The design of the game split the fanbase into two camps. You had the old school purists or newcomers / hero shooter fans. The game tried to please both and ended up pleasing neither. The problem was identity. Quake Champions didn't fully commit to being either a true arena shooter or a hero shooter. It was stuck in limbo, a mashup of ideas that didn't always work well together. And unfortunately, that led to a player count that never stabilized. Even when id Software introduced a classic playlist removing active abilities for purists, it wasn't enough. The game had already alienated many longtime players, and new players were either confused by the game's high skill ceiling or unimpressed with the outdated feel. Quake Champions was incredibly punishing for beginners, and it didn't help that the champion system made learning the game even harder. Imagine being new to arena shooters and jumping into a lobby with no effective tutorial, high movement speed, players flying around the map, one-shot weapons, and on top of that, 14 different characters with different speeds, hitboxes, and powers. It was a recipe for new player churn. Even if someone was curious about Quake, they probably bounced off after a few matches, and that's a big reason the population never grew. In the end, Quake Champions tampered too much with its formula. Instead of refining what made Quake great, it tried to modernize it into something that it was never meant to be. The champion system was bold, but it backfired. If gameplay design was the first nail in the coffin, then its monetization model and how it was handled in early access was a close second. While Quake Champions was never a fully priced release, it struggled to define what type of business model it actually followed. Was it free-to-play, premium, a hybrid? Even id Software and Bethesda seemed unsure. And that confusion trickled down to the players, damaging trust and limiting its ability to build a stable player base. Let's unpack the monetization misfires that hurt Quake Champions' potential from the jump. When Quake Champions entered early access in August of 2017, it wasn't free-to-play. Instead, players had to purchase the Champions Pack to access the game, and that pack unlocked all current and future champions. But here's where it got messy. The game was constantly advertised as if it would be free to play. That confusing messaging created a lot of hesitation. Some players held off, waiting for the free-to-play version. Others bought in, expecting a full experience, only to realize it was still unfinished. The free-to-play model did eventually launch in 2018, almost a full year later, but by that point the initial hype wave had already passed, and many potential players had moved on. Even in the free-to-play model, not all champions were available. Players who didn't own the Champions Pack had to earn or buy characters individually, using in-game currency or real money. This undermined one of the main pillars of classic Quake, balance and accessibility. When not everyone had access to the full roster, it skewed the competitive field. Some players even argued that the setup felt pay to win, especially when certain champions had clear meta advantages. While you could technically unlock champions with in-game currency, it was a slow, grind-heavy process. One that felt especially punishing in a high-skill environment. And yes, Quake Champions had loot boxes. The game featured a cosmetic system with backpacks and chests, which gave players random skins, shaders, vanity items, and weapon cosmetics. And while these didn't affect gameplay directly, the implementation felt dated and uninspired, especially during a time when the gaming community was becoming more increasingly hostile toward loot-based RNG monetization. You couldn't just buy the item you wanted, you had to grind for it or spend money and hope RNG was on your side. To make matters worse, these cosmetics weren't exactly game changers visually. Many skins were underwhelming, and the weapon variants often felt lazy and recolors rather than meaningful customization. The monetization system didn't feel exciting, it felt forced and tacked on. It wasn't until 2020, 3 years after launch, that Quake Champions introduced a battle pass system, a move that could have helped drive engagement had it been implemented sooner. By that point, games like Fortnite, Apex Legends, and even Call of Duty had normalized the Battle Pass format. It's a monetization model that gives players clear rewards for playing, encourages daily logins, and feels fairer than loot boxes. But Quake Champions Battle Pass arrived after most of the player base already left. Even then, it wasn't very exciting. The rewards were mostly lackluster, and a few standout cosmetics or meaningful incentives to grind. It was too little, too late. Another major issue was the length of early access. The game stayed in that state for over 2 years with no definitive roadmap, no clear communication, and no big marketing push. Players who were excited at launch quickly burnt out. Updates were slow, bugs lingered, upcoming features took months if not years to materialize. And all the while, the competitive scene didn't grow, the casual playlist felt dead, and the game didn't have the content pipeline to keep people coming back. That extended limbo killed momentum. In comparison, look at how Valorant handled their launch with betas, tight marketing cycles, aggressive post-launch support. Quake Champions lacked that structure. The irony is, despite its issues, Quake Champions had a solid foundation, the gunplay was satisfying, the movement once you got used to it felt great. The maps had that classic arena feel. It wasn't broken, it just never received that proper care. The devs could have invested in a long-term esports scene. They could have promoted community-made content, could have taken the monetization more seriously, offering fair pricing, curated cosmetics, or seasonal events that actually rewarded players. Instead, we got a game that felt unsupported. With every passing month, players felt like Bethesda had moved on. And eventually they did. In 2022, Quake Champions quietly stopped receiving significant updates. Its last major patch came and went without fanfare, and today it lives on as a ghost in the Steam library. Still technically live, but barely breathing. For a game that was supposed to revive the arena shooter, Quake Champions instead became a case study on what not to do when trying to modernize a classic franchise. If there's one thing Quake Champions didn't have on its side, it was timing. On paper, reviving arena shooter in the late 2010s sounded like a great idea. Nostalgia for fast-paced, skill-driven FPS games was bubbling under the surface, but when it came to execution, the window of opportunity had already begun to close, and Quake Champions struggled to find its place in the modern FPS landscape. So let's talk about the context of its release, the FPS competition at the time, and how Quake Champions became a victim of bad timing and a market that had already moved on. Arena shooters defined the late 90s, early 2000s, with Quake 3 Arena, Unreal Tournament, and Halo Combat Evolved. They built communities around skill-based, fast-twitch combat. But new FPS subgenres began to rise. Like Call of Duty 4 introduced progression, perks, and unlocks, Battlefield focused on large-scale warfare, Team Fortress 2 leaned into the hero shooter dynamic. By 2017, when Quake Champions entered early access, players were already used to persistent progression systems, daily challenges, cosmetic unlocks, and simply putting players into an arena and saying go wasn't enough anymore. The brutal truth, most modern FPS players didn't grow up on arena shooters, and those who did are now older, busier, and less likely to sink hundreds of hours into a grind-heavy game with minimal reward. Overwatch launched in 2016 and absolutely dominated the hero shooter space. It was colorful, polished, accessible, and team-focused, everything Quake Champions wasn't. Let's not forget another major force that arrived just as Quake Champions was finding its footing: Battle Royale. PUBG and Fortnite exploded in popularity in 2017 and 2018, offering massive scale, high-tension survival matches with evolving metas and constant updates. Players were no longer looking for tight, symmetrical deathmatch maps, they wanted unpredictability, survival, and last-man-standing showdowns. By the time Quake Champions went free-to-play, Fortnite was already breaking records, and Apex Legends was just around the corner. Compared to the explosive growth of those games, Quake Champions felt dated, static, and small scale. Another big problem, Quake Champions didn't have a strong marketing push. Outside a few appearances at QuakeCon and E3, the game didn't have the same hype cycles or influencer engagement that you'd expect from a modern competitive FPS. There were no viral trailers, no massive Twitch presence, no mainstream esports attention. Quake used to be the scene, but now games like Valorant, CSGO, and Call of Duty had taken over. Quake no longer felt essential, it felt like a throwback in a world that already moved on. At its core, Quake Champions suffered from an identity crisis. It was too punishing and skill-driven for casual players, it was too inconsistent and modernized for Quake purists. That middle ground is hard to build a community around. By now, we've broken down the gameplay missteps, monetization issues, and bad timing that led to Quake Champions to fade into obscurity. But was it doomed from the start? Not necessarily. Let's talk about what could have saved Quake Champions, or at the very least, what could have given it a fighting chance in a rapid changing FPS landscape. The development cycle often felt unclear, updates were infrequent or poorly communicated, and roadmap promises were vague or delayed. Players were left wondering, is this game dead? What's next? What would have helped is clearer communication of the roadmap with regular updates, monthly community check-ins or live streams, and involve the community in some way with map design contests, weapon tuning polls, or featured content. The game should have launched free-to-play and early access instead of the $30 champion pack. And if they wanted to get the money flowing in, have worthy cosmetics, not loot boxes. Despite its legacy, Quake Champions was barely on anyone's radar. Compare this to how Doom 2016 leaned heavy into the nostalgia, brutal music, flashy trailers, and a clear message. This is the return of classic FPS. Would have loved to seen a killer launch trailer with pure Quake DNA, a campaign focused on the return of arena shooters, and nostalgia-fueled events like Quake Legacy Week with old maps and weapons, cosmetics. And don't forget, this is Quake we're talking about, a franchise with deep roots in modding culture, yet Quake Champions launched with no mod tools, no map editor, and no support for community content. What could have helped was even a basic Forge-style editor for players to create custom arenas or even move weapons around. Cosmetic mods like retro weapon skins and classic announcer packs. Let players make Quake Champions into their own game, instead they were stuck with a stale content loop and no tools to fix it. So now that we've unpacked Quake Champions' failure, where does this leave arena shooters as a genre? It's easy to assume that maybe arena FPSs can't thrive anymore. That's it, it was a relic in the 90s and early 2000s, tied to LAN parties, local servers, and early days of PC gaming. But that would be underselling just how timeless the core gameplay loop can be when it's done right. The arena FPS isn't dead, it's just dormant. We've seen signs of life in recent years. Take Splitgate for example, perhaps one of the most successful arena-style shooters of the past few years. It combined Halo-like gunplay with Portal-style movement mechanics. While not a pure arena shooter, its success showed that there's an appetite for fast-paced, skill-driven gameplay, especially when paired with a unique twist. If another game wants to successfully revive the arena shooter genre, here's what it needs to do right. Respect the core, fast movement, tight gunplay, and an emphasis on map control. Don't abandon what made arena shooters special. Modernize the presentation. That doesn't mean dumbing it down, it means polish. Onboarding tutorials, sick UI, and progression systems that respect your time. Leverage creator culture. Map editors, shareable clips, mod support, let players build the community, give them tools, and they'll make content. Cosmetics and battle passes are fine, but nothing that fragments the player base or locks characters or weapons behind paywalls. It needs that hook with a twist. Splitgate has portals, Doom Eternal has the dash loop. Arena shooters need to evolve without losing their soul. Innovation is key. Here's where it gets interesting. In my opinion, the leaders of arena shooters are id Software and Halo Studios. We could see a Quake 6 or a Halo 1 reboot lead the charge and bring back the arena shooter genre to the top. Let's not forget about Bungie's Marathon reboot. While it's being marketed as an extraction shooter, the legacy of Marathon and Bungie's experience with Halo means it could sneak in some sneaky arena-style DNA. If Bungie gives us a multiplayer mode and ditches the PvE in favor of fast skill-based deathmatches, Marathon could reignite the spark for some fans, especially if they include custom games and competitive options down the line. But maybe, just maybe, someone else will step up, a new studio, a bold indie team, a reinvention of an old classic. One thing's for sure, nostalgia for the genre is still alive and the mechanics still hold up. It just needs the right game at the right time with the right vision. So Quake Champions failed to bring back arena shooters, but the genre didn't die with it. Instead, it gave us lessons about identity, about monetization, about listening to community, and respecting the DNA of what came before. Whether it's a big name revival or a breakout indie hit, arena shooters can and probably will make a comeback. But it has to be earned with clarity, respect, and a little bit of old school chaos. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what your favorite arena shooter is, and do you think we'll ever get a true comeback for the genre? If you like this breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content. I'll see you in the next one.